So welcome everyone. Yawaskeno. I'm Kriki Kazak. I am Seneca, Hot Clan, and Polish. And I work on Buffalo Commons, which is a joint collaboration between Partnership for the Public Good, which is a community-based think tank here in Buffalo. CRT, or Citizens for Regional Transit, is one of our partners, and we're grateful to partner with them to think through questions and answers around challenges and solutions related to transit here in Buffalo. Today you'll be hearing from Doug and Lizzie, and I'm going to pass it over to Doug in a second to talk a little bit more about content. But just to frame our programming a little bit more, you'll hear from Doug, you'll hear from Lizzie, but first it would be helpful if people wanted to type into the chat your name, if you're affiliated with an organization or group, and sort of what questions you may have coming into this conversation. I know we received a lot of questions ahead of time and we're excited to get to some of those, but that'll help frame our time today. Another thing is, if you need or want closed captioning, you should be able to see a CC option at the bottom of your screen. If you need any other accommodations, feel encouraged to chat me or to reach out. The way that the program will work is that Doug and Lizzie will be able to present, and then we'll pitch it over to them for a Q&A session. So if you have questions throughout the program, I encourage you to type them in the chat, and we'll save them for the end of our discussion. So again, feel free to type any questions into the chat. I'll help moderate some of those questions. Otherwise, I'll pass it back to Doug to get us started.
Okay, thanks, Kriki. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's start. Again, I'll add my welcome to everybody. We're excited to have a good turnout to this talk. It's an exciting topic and an important one in our opinion. I will be the presenter and presenting the work that Elizabeth Taber did as her role as a Cornell High Road Fellow this past summer. I will be doing the presenting, but Lizzie is on the call and she'll be available to answer questions, or feel free, Lizzie, to correct anything that I misrepresent if I make any mistakes on your work. So how do I, oh boy, now how do I make my, oh, you got to do this. So next slide. I was not able to share my slides directly, so I'm going to have to say next slide all the time, unfortunately. Okay, start out with a little bit of background from CRT, Citizens Regional Transit, just sort of set the groundwork. Next slide. And this, if you've come to any of our talks in the past, you've seen this chart. This is our mission. This is our goal. This is what we would like to accomplish eventually, and that is to achieve the plan that was originally laid out by the NFTA back in the 1970s. That is for a network of light rail using mostly abandoned, publicly available railroad rights of way. And as you can see, it would connect our region pretty completely. The black line down near Canal Side going up to the north, that's the 6 mile line that we have built, and we are very excited that the Amherst extension is sort of underway, although it's hit some glitches with the FTA, but we have finished some of the initial planning studies of that, so that should be moving forward. But we want to see the rest of the system built out, especially the East Side Airport line, which is the red line going to the east on the map. Next slide. And I want to point out that the importance of the light rail. This is a key issue that needs to be understood. If we want to have a good public transportation system in Buffalo, Niagara Falls, we need a light rail rapid transit system connecting things as the spine, connecting to lower frequency, slower buses. And you'll see when I talk about some of the work that Lizzie did, why that's important for the east side and who is using light rail and what a fast, high capacity mechanism like light rail would be able to provide. But if you look here, you can see that light rail is fast, 50 miles an hour between stops compared to like 30 or so, 35 with without traffic for the buses, and carry 600 to 700 people compared to 50 on a bus. So it's just a real big workhorse that can get the job done. Buses really can't. Next slide. And this is the line that was originally planned, and it's our proposal for accomplishing the East Side Airport extension. And you'll see different versions of this later in the talk, but the point I'll make here is that this line not only connects east side of Buffalo and the airport to our downtown, but it also connects with a large list of Buffalo existing bus lines that would provide connectivity to all the various neighborhoods of Buffalo. Next slide.
1 second.
This is something that's important as well. I mean, light rail is not only important for mobility and connecting our city, which is desperately needed, but it's also important for meeting the challenge of climate change. This is a chart that shows it's an inventory of greenhouse gas generation sources that was done by Erie County as part of their commitment to meet the Paris Climate Accords. You can see the chart, the bar on the left is for 2005, and 2014 we have made some progress, very little in transportation, but you can see most of the greenhouse gases come from transportation. And the brackets there showing 16% more we need for meeting the Paris Climate Accord goals, and then 32% for meeting the New York State CLCPA. It's a law that was passed and signed by Governor Cuomo. That's the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act, if I've got that right, but it's those are the right words, I think. So well, anyway, we really need transit to be able to meet these goals. You can see that very clearly. Next slide. And it's not just the climate, but you can see what we've done to our city. And if you've seen my talks before, you've probably seen this chart. But we have a wonderful waterfront. But when you zoom out, what we have is parking lots and the I-190, which is a parking lot much of the time. And the red on the map there, those are surface parking lots. Green are parking ramps. So we basically turned our city, and we aren't the only ones, other cities have done this, into a big parking lot. And to be able to fix that problem, we just need to get people out of their cars and find better ways to move around. Light rail does that. Next slide. And there's a lot of people who feel that really the way to solve the problem is just everybody would buy an electric. I think you skipped a slide. Did you, Cricky? Anyway, that's okay. This is fine. But anyway, the thought is that if we just switch to electric cars, everyone just drives an electric car, we'll solve, I guess not, okay. We'll solve the problem. And it's not true. I mean, baby, if you look at what we've got, every ton of cement, which is required to carry all the cars, generates a ton of CO2. Half of cars, 50%, are made out of plastic. We've got 4 billion tires already in landfills waiting for someone to figure out what to do with them, and we're generating millions every single year. We just can't keep on doing this way. If we get people out of their cars and have an alternative, we can start to solve that problem, these problems. Next slide. And the math is simple on this, and basically the Buffalo's Metro Rail has a capacity of 700 people. That's equivalent to 14 buses, and it can take anywhere between 140 and 700 cars off the road. And that's every 10 minutes in each direction of the service. So if we want to solve our problem for climate change and reducing vehicle miles traveled, which is really the solution to climate change, we need a high capacity transit system, and light rail rapid transit does that. Next slide. Okay, next slide. And I want to point out, it's not always recognized, but transit is a life critical service for those who depend on it. And as you go through this presentation on the east side, you're going to see that there's a lot of people, especially on the east side, but other places as well, disabled people, young people who don't drive, but a lot of people depend on public transportation. And it's a life critical service for those who depend on it. Next slide. One of the questions that we got before the talk, or in the email, it was, is there support for this? So I got a couple of charts here, and I'm going to go through them quickly. But basically, is there support for this? These are charts. This is from the One Region Forward project that was a joint effort by the GBRTC, UB Regional Institute, and the Partnership for the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, and they went out in terms of the transportation component of that work. They asked people, where should we invest our money to improve transportation? And clearly, 74%, dwarfing the other options, is public transportation investments. And they also said, where should we connect in terms of our light rail specifically? And the highest priority was the airport. And 4 out of the 8 are, actually line up on the east side airport extension. You'll see the maps later, but that's basically, there is support. Next slide. And a few quick words about our petition. We have a petition out there for which basically asks our community leaders to demand a transit revolution, calling for 3 things. 1, extending light rail to highest demand along highest demand corridors, provide intermodal connectivity, and most importantly, establish long-term sustainable transit funding. We really are going to have a difficult time meeting the goals of having a really workable transit system that people will want to and be willing to take, but certainly choice riders, is to improve the funding. So you can see we've got a lot of signatures, several mayors and town councils, including the Erie County Executive Mark Polenkars has signed it. So we do have support for our goal of extending the light rail. Next slide. And then this is just a list of some of the organizations that have also signed. You can see Kaleida Health, Douglas Development, that's Doug Jamel, Simonelli Real Estate, and so forth. Push Buffalo, Voice Buffalo, League of Women Voters, Buffalo Urban League, and there's a whole bunch more, but you can see them listed there. There is support for doing this. Next slide. And even this is just an informal poll that was done by the Buffalo Business First magazine, and I put this out here because it's the business community that's their customers, and they put out an informal survey back in 2015. Do you think we should extend light rail to the airport? And 90% yes, 90% yes. And you can see some of our leaders, Howard Zemsky, Mayor Brown, and Mark Polenkars have also expressed strong support for extending light rail. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Let me now talk about the work that Lizzie did. And again, Lizzie, feel free to chime in if I missed something or say something that's not exactly correct. But I think I did a good job of reading your report, the excellent job in pulling it all together. A lot of material. You're going to see how much she did to pull together for this. I also give a shout out to Betsy Giles and Carl Skampinski. There are the 2 CRT board members who kind of work with Lizzie to bring this together. Next slide. And I want to thank our sponsor. This work was supported and overseen by the Partnership for Public Good, specifically Sarah Wooten and Cricky, who's on this call. They're always very, very helpful in overseeing and helping us do our work, and really appreciate it. And also we want to thank the Cornell High Road Fellowship Program, who actually provided the funding for Lizzie to do her work over the summer. Next slide. For one more thank you slide, then I want to get into the meat of this. But I do want to thank a whole bunch of people who were willing to spend time and be interviewed by Lizzie, including several of the managers from NFTA, Hal Morris, the executive director of our local MPO, Howard Zemsky, former NFTA chairman and former chairman of the Empire State Development Corporation for New York State and founder of Larkinville, Paul Simonelli, Fred Frank, and so you can see the list there. But we had some across several, areas of expertise. So we got some really good input on our work, and it's reflected in Lizzie's report. Next slide. The way Lizzie did her work, and it worked out, and you'll see why it really worked out well by doing it this way. But she took the airport, East Side Airport Extension, which is the blue cover, bar across there, and she picked with support of Carl, who's familiar with the East Side, picked 4 stations to focus her study on. So she looked at Larkinville, Broadway Fillmore at Central Terminal, where the stop would be near the Wild Route building, Bailey and West Shore, and Harlem and Walden. And I'll mention here, one of the questions we got before, leading up to this talk was, does this have any connection to high-speed rail? And the answer is really no. It's only public transit. It's light rail, specifically connecting to bus transit, which is really within Erie County and Niagara County and connecting our region. But by selecting, and our selection is to have the Broadway Fillmore station at Central Terminal, and we hope that will someday become a train station again and be a place for high-speed rail to come. So in that case, it will actually be, the light rail that we're talking about here will be connected to the Amtrak high-speed rail. Next slide. And what Lizzie did, she did 4 things. One is to quantify the economics and demographics of the 4 areas that I've shown here. Evaluate the economic and social impact of light rail extension, then define the role of equitable transit-oriented development. And that's a new area. And I'll talk a little bit about that, quite a bit about that, and what it is and how it works, and then what we expect that could maybe do in the east side of Buffalo. And then finally, I'll finish with some important factors about extending Buffalo's light rail and what we need to do to make that happen. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, starting with just the demographics, and this is just a chart that shows the racial demographics across the east side airport extension, and then compared to Buffalo and to Cheektowaga. All of Lizzie's work does that. It compares to Buffalo and to Cheektowaga, which is the next out suburb just outside of the light rail. And actually, the Walden station is actually in Cheektowaga. But this is an important, she's got a bunch of these like this, but she focuses most of her work on the specific stations. And you can see why it's a little bit misleading to look at the east side in general, because there's quite a few differences between the 4 stops involved, particularly the Walden stop, which is in Cheektowaga. Next slide. And you can see that here and I put a red bar around the 3 stops that are in Buffalo, the Larkinville, Broadway, Fillmore, and Wild Route. And you can see that it's a much greater Black and Hispanic, or Black population in this case, and smaller white populations, and compared to the Walden station, which is in Cheektowaga, which is largely white. And you'll see in a minute that there's also, in terms of income and poverty levels, is much more prominent in those Buffalo stations. Next slide. In fact, that's what this shows here. You can see employment rate, and I've highlighted those in red, in medium income. And when you do an average, like the whole corridor for income, it comes out to like just about $50,000. But that's because it's getting driven up by the $77,000 income levels in the Walden station, which is really more of a suburb. It's Cheektowaga, it's a wealthier area. So anyway, we're going to focus on the specific stations, and you'll see how they compare. Next slide. So this is, and I'm not going to be able to go through all of them. At the end, I'm going to just kind of point to a bunch of the statistics that Lizzie talked about and focus on some that I think are kind of important for understanding where we are in terms of extending light rail. This one here talks. It has the how people get around, how people travel, and you can see the 3 stations in Buffalo are drive alone has about 60%. and the rest are on transit and other modes. And that matches up almost exactly to the bar across the bottom, which is lack of car access, about 40%. When you compare that to the Walden station, where only 10% of the population lacks a vehicle, a car, access to a car, and only 10% or so use public transit, or less than that, but like the 90% drive alone. So we really, if you want to get people out of their cars, we need to have a transit system that people will choose. And when they have a car and can afford a car, they choose to drive, and we continue with the problems of pollution, congestion, and all the things that I was, the climate issues that I was just kind of referring to. So I'm going to point here. Yeah, the one point I want to make here too is that I say that the car access is like 40% on the Buffalo stops. People can afford a car, but they really can't afford a car. They stretch to have a car. It's cost a lot of money, and as you'll see later in the talk, I have some specifics on that. But it actually makes it harder to afford housing and medical expenses, and it just puts a lot of stress on families. So if we can have an affordable public transportation system that people can use and satisfy their travel needs, then we'll be able to also save money for people. Next slide. And this is an interesting slide. This I pulled out. This is from the NFTA. I'm sorry. This is from the GBNRT, the NFTA GBNRTC survey of rider survey that was done in 2017. And you can see who's riding transit. The blue bars are percentage of people riding transit by income, and the red bars are the percentage of population in each of those categories. Clearly, that there's overrepresentation in those with lower incomes on transit, and an underrepresentation for those with higher incomes. So those who can afford to not take transit or to drive do, and they don't take transit. So if we want to get people out of their cars and start to address some of the climate issues, and provide a system for those who can't afford cars that works better and is actually a system people would choose to take, we need a better transit system. Next slide. And to see how this breaks, this is the same survey, to see how this breaks down ethnically. Obviously, you can not surprisingly, I guess, is that white Caucasian populations are overrepresented in the census, or underrepresented on transit, compared to Hispanic and Blacks, African Americans on transit, overrepresented on public transit. So it's really what you would expect based on the previous slide. Next slide. I bring this up again just to reemphasize the importance of a system that really works, one that has a light rail that moves people across large distances very fast, 50 miles an hour between stops, compared to buses that are going 50 miles an hour and quite often get stuck in traffic. But we need both. So we already have the bus system, although they need to be more frequent. We need a better budget to be able to allow that. But we need both. We need buses connecting to a light rail system with the network that I showed a minute ago. Next slide. And this is an interesting, actually an important chart that illustrates what light rail can do. If you look at the miles of service that the NFTA provides, they provide over 1,000 miles of bus service. I think it's 1,004. It's just a little over 1,000 miles. And light rail provides 6. But light rail carries almost 20% of the riders compared to 80% on buses. And that's really a testament to the power of light rail. I mean, it carries hundreds of people every 10 minutes. It goes 50 miles an hour back and forth every 10 minutes versus buses running every 20 minutes or so, carrying 50 people. It can do a real job. So anyway, it's I get that right. It's 20% for light rail in terms of passengers. Next slide. And this, I'm not going to go through this other, but this is, when you get our report and read it, what Lizzie did for each of the stations, she also has an evaluation of how many people live there, the population growth, or it was actually a decrease in population, although that was based on the 2010 census. So I think we're going to see some increases, and we're hoping to be able to do an update of this report and bring in the 2020 census that just came out. Industries, poverty levels, education levels, car ownership, I mentioned that. How ownership, occupied versus unoccupied residents, all those are there, for each of these 4 stations compared to, the entire corridor to Buffalo and to Cheektowaga. So you should try to look into it when you can. It'll be posted on our website. I know that Carl and Betsy and Jim are still cleaning up typos and some formatting things and making it really, really readable. But I think in the next week or so, they'll be on our website. So look out for it. Next slide. Yep. Okay, in terms of economic and social impact and what are the benefits that light rail extension to the east side can do in those categories. Next slide. This is just a chart that comes, this is from the NFTA 2010 strategic analysis, which is the most recent. It was an update of the 2001, which had very similar results. And all of these analyses and compare, this one is comparing various alternative light rail extension options. And there are 2 for Amherst, 2 for Airport, and 1 that was Elmwood Avenue, which are all recommended for evaluation, for further study. When you look at it, you look at the numbers, the Amherst extension always scores highest in terms of ridership, because 25,000 UB students hop on it the day it's opened. It's really a good payback, and it's going to be a great benefit for UB and for the region, and it will be a high ridership. But that's only moderate development potential there. When you look at the airport extension, that always comes out high, as it did on this one. So, I'm going to talk a little bit more about transitory development and some of the benefits of investing in light rail in terms of stimulating investment. And what this study that the NFTA did showed that the best payback in terms of development is for the airport. Even though ridership will be lower initially, we believe that will actually increase as development happens there, and also with some park and rides and some incentives to use transit to get downtown. I think we'll get pretty good ridership on that east side extension. Next chart. Okay, this is one of Jim's. Whenever I use one of Jim's charts, you can see all the fancy stuff. So, but anyway, this just basically reiterates, some of the fact that you can get all these facts off of the APTA, American Public Transit Association's website. But every $1 billion of money invested in transit generates 50,000 jobs. Every dollar invested in transit generates 5 in returns, economic returns, and so forth. You can see, but it makes economic sense to invest in public transit just on its surface, even before you just look at some of the issues of mobility and and development in neighborhoods and so forth. Next slide. And transit stimulates the economy by improving mobility as well. It reduces the average family share of earnings spent from 25 to as low as 9% of earnings. And that was what I was pointing out earlier. We're basically forcing people to have to pay for a car, and it puts a big hit on incomes, family budgets. So by having light rail extension, it helps reduce that, provides access to education, economic improvement, critical if you want to move up in terms of the economy, have access to jobs, to school, as well as to jobs and healthy food. And the last bullet is something that Lizzie identified as a commute time is one of the most significant factors in an individual's ability to escape poverty. So it's one of the most poverty-stricken areas of Buffalo that doesn't have good public transportation. So we need to change that. Next chart. And this is a study that was done by the PPG, a partnership with the public good, a number of years ago, and it looked at commute times for, and they looked at, it was commuting from, there was some east side locations and I think west side locations, and looked at several areas where there are significant jobs, the airport area, and there's a Tonawanda one, a couple of Tonawanda ones I think they were, but anyway, they're listed here, and looked at, compared how long it takes you to drive between those locations and take public transit, and then found the difference. And these are mostly bus routes to get to these locations because we don't have light rail that goes there. And you can see it can significantly increase the if anywhere up as much as 200% of the time for commuting, which is just not good for anybody. So that's another reason to extend the light rail. Next slide. So why do buses take longer? And it's probably obvious to most people, but I think we need to remind ourselves, buses, our frequency is like every 20 minutes to 45 minutes, longer on weekends and at night. Average wait time is 10 to 20 minutes, and they go 30 to 40 miles an hour, slower in traffic. You compare that to light rail with a frequency of every 10 minutes. During business hours, 20 minutes on off hours. Wait time is like 7. And actually, that was a correction that I made, Ricky. The later slide version of this, average wait time is like 5 minutes, half of the 10-minute frequency. So for light rail, and again, 50 miles an hour between stops. Next slide. Another reason, another important reason and benefit from light rail extension investment is environmental health benefits. And you can see the charts on the right. These are from Lizzie's report, and the 2 bars on the left are average light rail. Then the real little small ones are best light rail, and ours is best light rail because we get our energy from hydropower in Niagara Falls. So we have one of the cleanest light rail systems in the country. You compare that to the bars on the right for buses, and both average buses and some better buses. Even electric buses are not going to be that good. They'll be better, perhaps better than what's on here, especially because most of buses don't get power from hydro. I don't think NFA is going to be able to either. Maybe they will, but even still, you still have all the other problems of all the tires and the bad performance and so forth. And you can see that these are lined up against volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxides, and carbon monoxide. And these are compounds that are put into our air every day, especially, for example, along the Kensington that goes through the east side, where we have higher incidences of asthma and cancer rates. So we really need to reduce vehicle miles traveled to be able to address this problem of pollution and the health effects of that. Also, light rail promotes walking, which is associated with lower body mass index. I should have defined that. Obesity and obesity-related illnesses, better access to medical centers, and, as I mentioned earlier, reduction of greenhouse gases, which isn't even on these charts. I showed that on an earlier chart. Next chart. Okay, so let's talk about equitable transitory development. This is the new thing which is being done across the country, and we want to do it here as well. Next slide. First, let me define transitory development. And this is, this has been around for a little while, and it's been demonstrated. When you invest in high capacity public transportation in an area, systems like light rail, particularly the light rail, that's one of the main ones that have been used. It generates, benefits in terms of reducing disinvestment and business development and so forth. It's characterized by having a mix of uses in terms of residence and commercial mixed in the same building, for example, moderate to high density, pedestrian orientation and comfortable pedestrian landscapes, transportation choices, multiple, reduced parking and so forth. And it's something that has been done for quite a while now, and it's really been demonstrated to have an effect. But the downside of it has been gentrification, because if you have if you don't have any controls on this, and it just goes and people come in and start buying that property and, and fixing them up near the light rail, it ends up raising the cost, the value of the property, raises rents, and people who were living there before get forced out in gentrification. So, next slide. So the newest approach is what's called equitable transitory development. And it's an approach to transitory development that avoids gentrification. And it has a bunch of features, incorporates affordable housing by requirement, promotes historic preservation, stimulates local businesses, regional connectivity and multimodal access and so forth. It's something that places across the country like New York City, for example, have actually required. If you build a new building in New York City or expand one that's existing, there's a requirement to include a certain portion of affordable housing, and that's happening in Buffalo. The Common Council is pushing people, business people who are real estate focused people, to include affordable housing, and you're seeing it in a lot of the developments on the east side, particularly the Forge. I'll show you. I got a picture of that later on. But it's these newer developments include affordable housing, so it avoids the problem of forcing people out just because you have a nice transportation system. Next slide. And there's a historical context to this. For years, majority communities have struggled under targeted disinvestment. The east side of Buffalo is a good example. This has created accumulated wealth and opportunity deficit over many, many, many years, and generation after generation. And poor transportation options exacerbate this problem and make it worse because people are stuck there and they don't have options to move up. Active steps are needed to overcome the accumulated disadvantage, and that's one of the reasons that eTOD, equitable transitory development, is desperately needed. Next slide. And this is a definition of eTOD, and it's in Lizzie's report. Basically, 3 goals is to increase access to mobility, affordability, efficiency, reliability, and so forth. Reduce air pollution. I talked about that a little bit, but we certainly have a big problem with that on our east side with the Kensington, with 60,000 cars going back and forth there every single day. We need to reduce that. And then enhance economic opportunity by connecting to education, medical, and so forth that we talked about. So that's what eTOD focuses on. And this is from the Greenlining Institute, this chart. Next chart. And a couple of key principles that I pulled out of Lizzie's report, and she highlights them as well as being important. But a major component for achieving economic and racial justice and success is equitable access to fast, efficient public transportation. So basically, and if you look at the second bullet, we want to provide transportation and make transportation investments, provide better transportation services in the areas, in the communities with the greatest need, not in the areas of highest immediate return. If we were to do that, we would just build more transit out to the suburbs, which we don't want to do. We need to have it in the city on the east side, and that's where the greatest need is. Next chart. And finally, some factors associated with extending light rail in Buffalo. Next slide. One thing is the east side. There is room to grow. A couple of pictures here illustrate that, and you can see the Google map. If you've been over there, there's a lot of empty space. There's room to grow. This will actually make it easier to have transitory development effect happen because you can build in the spaces that we have available, and it'll also make it more difficult to have the gentrification impact as well. I was looking in preparing for this talk. I was looking back in some past NFTA reports, and in 1960, I don't know if people realize this, we were the second most dense city in the United States, next to New York City in 1960. We still have the same city, same infrastructure, the same roads, the same, water and mains and so forth. So we can fit a lot more people. We can build back a lot of density in our city if they can handle it. Next slide. And the other thing I'll mention here, there is some investment happening in the East Side now. This is an important program which is ongoing. It's the East Side Avenues project. And it's focused on 4 corridors identified here: Bailey, Fillmore, Jefferson, and Michigan. And it's basically making the neighborhoods more walkable. They're providing enhanced bus service. And businesses are actually doing some investment as well, in addition to what's being provided as part of this the state-funded project. And I would point out that 3 of the corridors will intersect with Buffalo's light rail rapid transit system. So there'll be synergistic effects between the 2 programs. Next slide. And you're already seeing some positive effects on the East Side. You always see the bad pictures that I showed a minute ago. There are plenty of them, but I just went on this. These pictures are from Google Maps. I just went in and took up a bunch of pictures. The one on the upper left, it's really showing, looks like a really, vibrant, it looks like certainly a business that's being developed and being promoted in the East Side, next to a storefront with boarded up windows. The next picture on the top is a house that's in. There's lots of examples of this. If you look on Google Maps, you can zoom around and look at them. Some places where there's some really nice, well-kept houses next to one that's slated to be torn down, and then the ones on the bottom, they're alone and amongst some open space as well. But there's some development and some real progress in terms of turning around the East Side. And then the Forge, that's the mixed use resident apartments that are being developed on Broadway on the East Side, again with affordable apartments included in that. Next slide. And a quick note on the cost. What is the cost to extend light rail? And this is from Lizzie's chart, and we've been using a number like 90 million to 100 million, but it's really 670 million is the low end, and I think we're probably going to be closer to that here because we have existing publicly owned rights of way. We don't have to, get property or tunnel or any of the expensive things that you have to do. And you can see that for the 13-mile run, for the $100 million, it's $1.3 billion. And for transit projects, the federal government pays 50%, local, that's basically state and local together, is 50%. So the federal share for that $100 million approach would be $650 million with the equal amount from the state. For the $70 million one, $55 million for both shares. But the problem we've been trying to fight unsuccessfully, and I know the NFTA has worked on this as well, but highways are funded by the federal government at 80%. So you take a cost of highway, and it ranges, the cost of highway building ranges all over the place. It's very hard to get your handle on it. But the one extension, the highway that was proposed to replace the Skyway a while ago, I believe that's where this one comes from, was $177 million per mile. Again, this is an expressway level or a 4-lane highway level road. 13 miles, that would cost $2.3 billion, but the federal government's going to pay 80% of that. So the federal share is $1.84 billion, and the local share is $460 million. So it's a problem, because when the local MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the GPNRTC, headed up by Hal Morris, makes decisions about what projects to move forward with, well, they're really responsible for the local share of that. The federal government is really like almost free money. It comes from elsewhere, at least. It's not free. We all pay taxes, but it's it's not from our local budgets. So it's very hard to pick a transit project, because because of the unfair weighting of how much the federal government will pay for. And so we would like to see those formulas be equal so that transit projects could at least be evaluated on an equal basis. Next chart. Okay, so let me conclude. This is my last chart, and let me just make some of the points that I've made throughout this talk. Buffalo needs light rail rapid transit, not just buses. Buses as the primary mode alone don't do the job. We need to integrate a network of light rail feeding the buses. East Side Extension is a critical piece for making Metro Rail and Buffalo Transit System complete. It was part of the original plan, and as I showed earlier, the people want it. That was when you ask people, where do you think light rail should go, they all say East Side into the airport. East Side has significant emptinesses, a real opportunity for development. East Side is already starting to come back. The East Side Avenues projects, for example, and use of mixed use with developments with the portable housing. The TOD, transitory development benefits of light rail investments will facilitate rebirth of the East Side, and eTOD will facilitate those benefits without gentrification. And it will also serve people who have been neglected for way too long, and to help bring them out of poverty for those who are. Basically the same old is no longer acceptable. We need to integrate and connect our region with high capacity, high speed transit. The old model of waiting until development occurs to invest in transit overlooks the importance of transit as a driving factor in that development. And the last point is the environment can't wait any longer. We've already ruined our environment. Global warming is with us today, and we have to start making the kind of investments that will be able to allow us to reduce the greenhouse gas generation and pollution, which really comes mostly from cars. And that's my presentation. I don't know if anybody, Lizzie, do you want to have anything to add, or?
That was a lovely presentation, Douglas. Thank you for reporting on my report so excellently. I think you covered a lot of what I covered in my report, and I'm excited to see it. It's in its final form released, so everyone can have a look at it firsthand. I tried very much with this report to stay close to numbers and figures, and not to get too ideological. And I based the report very heavily off of a couple of papers that were sent to me by my supervisors, one by the Green Lining Institute and another by Strategic Economics, to try and balance the perspectives that I was taking as from both like an equitable transit-oriented development standpoint and one of just economic suitability. And that was sort of the basis of my report. And I think Douglas did an excellent job going over it and looking into the different areas that I spent so much time researching. So thank you for that. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Okay, and I will add my thanks to you for your work. I think it was a great job. I'm a retired transportation research engineer, and I know how hard it is to pull together so much information and make it understandable. And there's a lot there, and I really appreciate the hard work that you did for us. So I guess, Cricky, why don't we open it up to whatever you read questions or whatever, how you want to do it.
Yeah, first I'll just ask some of the questions maybe that were sent via email today that didn't get a chance to get forwarded to you. And then if folks have additional questions, feel encouraged to type them in the chat, and then we can lift them up to Doug and to Lizzie. So one of the questions was almost a follow-up question to the one that you did address about support. So it was about, is there any political support, or what does it look like from local politicians for something like this?
Well, I did show the chart that I had. It showed there's a wide spread support among our leaders and mayors and so forth, and it's pretty positive, and we've meet with our legislators as well, and we promote this with them, and they're positive as well, but they're the ones that have to find the money, so they're always a little more hesitant to say, oh yeah, we'll do that tomorrow, but there is support there, And
Yeah.
and the petition that we had up there, that was a petition that we did for businesses and for the political leaders. But we also every year have a petition, although the last 2 years because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to, but we have petitions, and we always get over 1,000 signatures on basically this petition every year from people who come to the various shows. We go to the Elmwood Festival, we go to the one in the east side there by the
Juneteenth. Yeah, I just wanted to add too, if I could, Senator Tim Kennedy, State Senator Tim Kennedy has been a very vocal proponent of the East Side Airport extension for many years, and we appreciate his support. And he is the chairman of the Senate, the State Senate Transportation Committee, so he is an important ally to have in this effort as well.
Yep.
Sorry, this is Elizabeth chiming in.
Yeah, and thanks for doing that. I should have mentioned that, because that's important. He was a leader in this. He several years ago, he called a meeting of the NFTA with us and said, when are you guys going to get the light rail out to Cheektowaga? So, I mean, he was a leader. Sean Ryan has been out there in front. There's been several others. Their names are blanking me, but Tim Kennedy is probably the most vocal and the one out there in front the most. But there's a lot of support for wanting to do this in our legislatures as well.
Great. So a follow-up to that is, it sounds like there's community support. It sounds like there's business support. It sounds like there's political support. So what is stopping it from happening?
Well, that's a $65 million question. You know, I don't know. You know, I mean, I think, you know, there's been a reluctance over the years to invest in public transportation. There's, you know, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, it was all about cars and roads, and that mentality has carried on. We spent a lot of money on our roads, and now we're stuck spending a lot of money fixing them and maintaining them. And there hasn't been a momentum and a willingness to invest in public transportation. And the other aspect of that is that because we haven't invested in our public transportation, it isn't very good. I mean, NFTA does a good job. They do with the budget they've got. But it's, you know, buses are running every 20 minutes, so they're stuck in traffic. There's no high-speed light rail. So people who are left taking public transit are poor people, and they don't have any political clout, and they're easy to ignore. So I think that's the reason we've been ignoring them and ignoring public transportation investments. And I do think that some of the points that I made in my talk, the recognition of climate crisis. We're in a crisis right now. And then the whole economic transit-oriented development movement, you know, the recognition that we need to have transit to help bring people out of poverty. I mean, I think there's a better recognition today than there have been in the past. And I do think things are moving around. I mean, we're looking right now at extending light rail to Amherst. Tim Kennedy, as Betsy pointed out, has been, you know, leading and promoting the airport extension, or the East Side Airport extension. So I do think you're going to see some investments to start to happen. It's happening elsewhere. If you go down, even in Texas, even Houston, even you know, some of the red states, they've extended their light rail. You know, and Buffalo needs to be. We were one of the first cities in the country to have a light rail system, and others are getting ahead of us now. So we need to kind of catch up. We have existing railroad rights of way that are publicly owned for most of those routes that I showed on the map that I had displayed in the beginning. And that makes it very affordable. So we just need to make it happen.
Yeah, on the note of affordability too, I think I saw in the chat someone commenting that when we're looking at the price tag for expanding light rail, we should not just take that number in isolation, but look at how much public money we are spending on road maintenance. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe in Erie County, it's $26,000 a year per lane mile.
I believe that's the number. Yep.
So think of all the lane miles we have in Western New York and how many we've even added since 1990, despite you know, losing a lot of population. That's starting to stabilize and turn around. But nonetheless, during an era when we lost a lot of population, we kept building more roads and sprawling, etc. So yeah, an important thing to keep in mind when looking at the price is to see what we already spend on unsustainable types of transportation.
Yep. Yep, good point.
Great. And Elizabeth answered the one that was in the chat, so thank you for that. We did get one more as an email today, and that's around, so would the private sector be interested in investing something like this? And I'll add a little bit of flair to that, which is to say, not that we necessarily need to give tax incentives or breaks to private companies or organizations, but could there be a policy that would do that if they invested in something like transportation that would, as you mentioned, increase access to jobs, opportunities, and things like that?
You know, that's something that has happened elsewhere, and again can happen here as well. I forget the term for it, but for example, in Washington D.C., where they've extended the light rail, the heavy rail out to their Dulles airport. You know, the businesses there volunteered or agreed to have their taxes raised. And I forget the term for that. It might come to me, but there's a term for that. Basically they say, yeah, well, if you build the light rail, we will pay higher taxes on the increase in our business. So they won't have to agree to pay. That's what happened in the DC area. So, and there's a whole bunch of schemes that do things like that. That the businesses want light rail. They want better transportation for their customers, and they are willing to pay for it. They're not willing to pay for it up front though. That's a government function, but they are willing, you know, and other places in Buffalo will as well. I'm sure they will as well. Be willing to pay a higher rate of taxes if they're going to get a better transportation system serving their businesses.
Great. So those
tax incentive financing, I think it's called.
great.
Okay.
Intuitively named. So those are the questions that we have right now, but I want to encourage folks, if they do have questions, to type them in the chat. Someone did make a comment though that I want to lift up in case people don't have access to the chat right now, is that someone had read a study years ago that showed a similar total population from the 50s to the 90s in Buffalo, Niagara, where roughly the same population takes up 3 times the area, requiring more lane miles and other infrastructure per person.
That's exactly right, and and actually we have sprawl. We have more area, and the population actually decreased to 1990. That's the One Region Forward report that I referenced in my talk, and I think these charts are going to be posted on our website, and I think probably on yours as well, Ricky. But anyway, you can take a look. But that One Region Forward report, it's all in there, and that was one of the main takeaways. We have significantly increased our area, the metropolitan area and you know, developed area, and so at the same time our population has decreased. I was very pleased to see that our population finally increased in 2020, the latest census. I don't know how that breaks down on east side, west side, suburbs, and so forth, but we have seen an increase in our population. I know the Buffalo population has gone up in general. Mm-hmm. So there's some pluses there.
Yeah, and I can actually provide a link. Rusty from our Buffalo CoLab office did a geographic analysis of both the increases and decreases by even the neighborhood level in Buffalo. So I'd be happy to share that too. Another comment from the chat was, a key player from the business community is the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, which we saw had articulated support for this. If they would commit to extending the light rail, it could happen. If you have any thoughts, ideas, or had any recent conversations with them?
I can respond to that. Obviously, as they were one of the partners in the One Region Forward study, so they're a part of that. So they're behind that. They have had extending light rail in their annual plank a number of times in past years. I don't think they have it in this year. I don't know why not, but I do think they are generally supportive of it. Probably the reason is that if you look at this year's plank, there's a lot of, you know, COVID-19, and I mean, there's all kinds of current things in there that probably are not as, you know, extending light rail probably isn't quite as high on their list, but they have in the past come out and had it in their plank. We want light rail extended, so they have done that.
Great. And there's a couple more questions that have trickled into the chat. One is, I heard in Seattle, they are considering expanding their metro to Redmond or Microsoft office. This would give a huge employer in Seattle a stake in the success of public transit. Could something like this work in Buffalo?
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate the point about transit-oriented incentive financing that, I assume that they're doing that in Seattle. I don't know. Microsoft has got pretty deep pockets, so hopefully they're willing to contribute if it's going to connect their plant with the other parts of the region. So, but I don't know specifically. I do think we can make that work in Buffalo, though.
Yeah, I can address that a little bit because I get to go to Seattle quite often. And that is exactly correct. The construction is underway. It's almost done to go to the Microsoft campus. The Microsoft campus, if you were on that campus, you'd think you might have been at the University at Buffalo North campus in a way. It's very much like a college campus. And the state has always wanted to put oriented development on the State University of New York at Buffalo campus. I can see how this could be a very good synergistic tool to help the university realize its dream. Bob Shibley is the chief campus architect. He's been pushing hard for years to have using the campus itself for making incubator businesses. And they've wanted to build on the campus more, and they certainly could if they had light rail going to it. One of the biggest problems businesses have right now, I'm sure you see it every night on the news, there's a shortage of workers. If you can get your workers closer to where your business is by putting them on transit, you can, you open up your employment, the market for your employment to a wide degree. If you saw the earlier slide, there was a slide where there was 40% of the people in that area don't have cars. Well, you're losing out on 40% of the labor market if you're not supporting public transit. So yes, very much definitely would help, especially in the Amherst corridor and in the East Side corridor.
Yeah, I would add to that the recent Amazon our request for proposals for a second headquarters had effective transit network or something to that effect, really implying light rail or heavy rail as one of their preferred criteria for the selection of where they're going to build their plant. And mentioning the Seattle thing, that one, and Jim would know better than me, but it included some really big bridge work, and theirs was like 290 million dollars a mile or something like that, because it was just unbelievable. We don't even include those costs in ours because we aren't even thinking about something like that.
The Seattle system is a real outlier. When I rode on it the first time, it was like almost the day after it opened. And that thing is elevated in the sky a couple 100 feet in places. It's elevated and goes way up in the air through a mountain. And there's a train station in the middle of the mountain, and God only knows who could get to it. I don't know why, if anybody's living in the middle of the mountain, but they have a train station in the middle of the mountain, and it goes right through. And yes, it was $400 million a mile. No, it's the most expensive thing that's ever been built in the US.
Okay.
Great, which is why it's so important to remember that in Buffalo, as many people know and many people don't, Buffalo was second only to Chicago as a rail hub in North America. So do we ever have legacy rail infrastructure that could be repurposed for 21st century purposes? Where we have all of these disused rail lines. So when we're talking about expanding light rail, for the most part, we're talking about expanding it above ground. So we don't have the expense of tunneling above ground on old railroad tracks, basically. And that's certainly, nobody's house has to come down. We don't have to purchase the land. So that's why our light rail is not only, with Niagara Falls hydropower, not only, one of the most sustainable, but we also, we're building on existing infrastructure, basically. So that keeps the costs down for us as well.
Great. And just to lift up a couple of comments, and then there's an additional question in the chat. The extension in Seattle is under construction. They passed voter propositions to levy a new tax. So that's one additional comment. They also have a north side extension under construction. There's additional tunnel, and they took HOV lanes on the floating bridge in order to construct it. And then just a comment, the station in the mountain has a neighborhood above it. They use elevators to reach the platform level. So just that comment. There's another question related to modern streetcars. So is there also a proposal for modern streetcars to the east and south? Can you comment on that and how the east side LRRT would tie into any modern streetcar proposal?
The problem with streetcars is that they're not much better than buses. They do have more capacity, but they're still in traffic. They're slow, and we have a foundation here of light rail, which can be extended, and they're going to go 50 miles an hour and carry as many as 700 people per train at capacity. So, we're not in favor of streetcars as a solution. It really doesn't make sense because we can build light rails on publicly owned rights of way that we already own. So that's our position.
I'd like to add to what Doug just said. Building a streetcar is almost the same price as building a high-speed rail system. You get very little bang for the buck. You'd be better off with doing things to optimize your buses, like giving them a little advanced time and things like that. I did want to say one thing a little humorous about my ride in Seattle. The train goes right by a restaurant that reminded me an awful lot of Salvatore's Italian Gardens, with just all kinds of bric-a-brac all over it. I laughed when I saw it. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I would add, in terms of people voting to pay for transit, I've got a chart that has a list of, and there was I think in I forget what year, 2019, maybe it was 2020, there was a lot of, maybe I think there was like 30 or 40 cities that did it in like 80 or 90% passed. Yes, please raise our taxes to give us better public transportation. So, across the country, there is support for doing that.
Great. So those were all the questions that we had right now from the chat, but I just wanted to encourage anyone, if you do have questions, you're welcome to type them into the chat or lift them up. It looks like we just got another one. This has been mentioned in Buffalo Rising recently, putting a new Bills Stadium on this proposed airport line corridor. How would this fit in?
We have not taken a position on the stadium location, but our position is wherever it is, it needs to be connected by public transport, by light rail. And if it's in the current location, the light rail line that it would use, the abandoned railroad right of way, goes right by it. So it would be very, very easy to connect that stadium with light rail. If they take the downtown location, of course, light rail goes downtown as well. But our position is wherever it goes, it needs to have light rail connected to it. I personally have been boycotting Bills games. I watch them on TV all the time, and I'll probably go to one if I get pushed into it. But until there's a light rail there, it's miserable. You're in traffic. You're bumper to bumper you got to leave hours ahead, and then you got to hang around until the game starts. I guess you can tailgate, which is fun too, but the traffic aspect of it is just terrible. Light rail would take care of that. It would have an option for everybody, and it would make the people that want to drive there have a better experience as well, because there'll be fewer cars on the road. You could meet people there if you want to tailgate, and it's a much better way to go.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that too, if the light rail could be expanded to the south towns and serve the stadium. Let's keep in mind there are only about, 10 home games per season. What if we could utilize all that vast parking around the stadium for park and ride for South Towns commuters, to get all of those cars that normally come in from the South Towns to downtown onto rail? So we would see it as a kind of maybe an opportunity, if the public is really going to invest all of that in a new stadium, if they are, then couldn't we get more bang for our buck by making the most of that public investment by extending the light rail to the South Towns?
Yep. In fact, some of the stadiums, all these stadiums, if you look in the Buffalo News had a bunch of articles on it, and they show all the different stadiums that have been built, and it shows the percentage of public versus private contribution to that. Some of those public contributions are in fact improved transportation to the stadium. And I believe that the stadium where the Giants and the Jets play, I believe that was one of the big contributions there, was that they built a heavy rail to that station from New York City. So, I mean, that could be the Buffalo contribution, public contribution could be taking the light rail to the stadium. That's our contribution.
Great. We had someone raise their hand. Alan, you can ask your question.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm really sorry to get here so late. I was super interested to see this presentation and learn about equitable transit-oriented development. It looks like this is being recorded, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. I'm actually late because I was in a studio review with UB that was looking at doing almost like a little urban hamlet along part of the Beltline. So there's lots of people thinking about different rail lines and different rail proposals these days, which is super exciting. And it seems to me, you folks did a presentation at First Presbyterian Church a few years ago to invite Pat Whalen to talk about the commuter rail, regional rail proposal between Niagara Falls and Buffalo. And, one of the conversations I've had with Pat is the fact that, that was envisioned as a sort of almost like a point-to-point service between Niagara Falls and Buffalo. But as I've discussed with Pat, it could also provide rail transit within where it runs within the city of Buffalo. So it would be worth studying transit-oriented development along that corridor and, what sites might accommodate transit-oriented development. And this equitable transit-oriented development concept, it sounds like it might be a good framework to look through. So super excited to go back and see the presentation later.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That's one of the projects we've been promoting. And the other advantage of that we really see as a big advantage is it takes the train, it's a regional rail train, but it would connect Buffalo to Niagara Falls, and it would end right at the bridge that goes over to Canada, where the GO train from Toronto goes. So, if we can somehow get the GO train to come across our side, or get our train to go across their side, Amtrak, or go across to their side. Amtrak already does that, so it is doable. And I know that Senator Schumer has been working on some of the legislation that can enable those kind of things to happen. We need to get the Canadians to agree to do it. But then you're connected to Toronto, and that would be a big boon if we can have rail connectivity between Toronto and Buffalo. We already, Toronto and Canadian customers are already a big part of our economy. If we could make a rail connectivity, doing that, I think it'd be a big plus. And we've been working with Pat Whalen to promote that as well. And so for years now. But
well, about what you just said, Doug, and when I jumped in on this, that there was the discussion about the stadium project, and it's interesting that the commuter rail project, regional rail project, could actually provide substantial, rail service to, a downtown stadium, for example, but yet it doesn't seem to be on anybody's radar. I had this conversation with Mark Pollenkars recently, and he wasn't even aware of this proposal, and yet he's one of the key people who's involved in the negotiations over the stadium. So that's one of the reasons why I think, if we had more study of these proposals out there, including looking at the potential economic impacts of transit-oriented development and whatnot, it would help get these things on the radar screen of public officials. And I know, of course, that's what your organization is all about. And I also needed to point out, it's great to see my Rochester friend, Dwayne Feller, in here. Dwayne and I worked together on the campaign to save Rochester's old subway tunnel downtown, which is still there. And it just needs to have some rail service put in.
Yep. Good point, Alan. And it's on our radar. So it's not on nobody's radar. It's on our radar. I was surprised that Pollen Cars wasn't familiar with that, because we've sort of, I don't know if we've briefed him personally. We briefed his staff, and he signed our petition. So I would have, and he's got our literature. I'm surprised. I have to try to get with him sometime and make sure he knows about that.
Yeah,
For
write
sure.
some stories, Alan. Write some stories, get them out there.
Yeah, as soon as I finish writing about this Kajakwita, that's on my list.
Good.
Great. So I don't think there's any more questions in the chat, but again, if you wanted to raise your hand or if you have any additional questions, you're welcome to type them into the chat. But I just wanted to invite Doug, invite Elizabeth, invite Lizzie to see if there were any closing comments before we take any final questions.
Well, I'll just say that, this is something we've been working on for a long time. There's finally a little bit of momentum, and there's a little bit of budget available now from the federal government. For the first time, things are starting to break loose. Looks like, maybe, we hope, but we need to show public support. So if you can call your congressman, call your senator, state and local representatives, and tell them that you want to, you want the light rail extended. You want one of the things that we've done is we have been pushing for years for the East Side Airport extension, and it was not on the NFTA's radar, but they have now, between us and I think Tim Kennedy's pushing as well. Maybe he pushed harder than us, but it is now on their long range plan to study the East Side Airport, and we want to see that happen while the Amherst extension happens. And so that when the Amherst extension finishes, we can start constructing the East Side Airport extension, not just start studying it. So, but anyway, call your representatives and tell them that this is an important thing, and join Citizens Regional Transit. We're funded by membership fees. So it's only people who join who give us any money at all, and never covers our full expenses. We do a lot of, when we go to conferences, we usually pay our own way, but partially, but anyway, join us and help us make the case.
Right. As far as getting the East Side Airport corridor going for redevelopment for eTOD and whatnot, we think it's important to get the rules changed so that when IDAs are giving tax incentives to developers, that they're only allowed to give tax incentives to development that takes place on existing transit corridors or existing transit lines. That would go for the LRRT, but also for bus lines. Maybe that would be a good strategy for putting a halt to this endless sprawl that we seem to see in Western New York.
Yep.
And Doug, is this an appropriate time to mention that the FTA threw us a curve on the Amherst extension?
Yeah, maybe it is, because I don't think I was very clear on that. You want to say it, or I can, either way.
I get angry about it, so I'll try to be nice. So I'm old, I'm in my 70s, and I was around when the transit system was originally put in. And I've been doing a lot of research. It was originally supposed to be all above ground, and then there was a citizens group called No Overhead Transit, and people of Buffalo demanded that the whole thing be underground, and then they did soil sample studies and found out, well, we can put it underground but not downtown because of the underground conditions. And the whole thing was supposed to go right out to the Amherst campus right away. And I'm not quite ready to point fingers yet, but I think I know the reason why it didn't really go all the way, and it stopped at the city line. And it's very symbolic to me as to why it does that, because it intentionally blocks access for people from the city to get to the university for a higher education, to get to Amherst where the growth is for the jobs. I think it's a deliberate action that is not very good. And we have gone through the last 10 years, the process of going through the environmental impact statements and explaining why extending the light rail is Buffalo's preferred option. In the MPO and the Metropolitan Planning Organization talk, it's the locally preferred option, LPO or something like that. And it's all submitted, all the paperwork was done. We've gone through the preliminary environmental impact stage. It was the NFTA turned the project over to the Federal Transit Administration. And then about 2 months after they got it, they kicked it back and said, well, we want you to think about BRT. And so this is where I get angry. And I call that basically racist transit. And I don't like that proposal at all. So I'm pretty angry about it. But Doug, you can talk so I don't get us into too much trouble here.
Well, I can, that is true. We were involved, and this is going back for 10 years now. We've been working with the NFT. We were, CRT was on, I was on their community that brought in various community stakeholders and so forth. And 10 years we've been studying this, and we came up at the very end after studying many alternatives and alignments and different modes, and we chose light rail all the way out to the campus, and that was done for very good reason. Bus rapid transit, which is what the FTA would like us to go back and restudy, really can't handle the load. And if you look at the numbers of buses you need, the UB is running like 3.5 minute headways right now. They can't really make it work very well. There's just because they get stuck in traffic, they get stuck at lights. And if you look at just that kind of headway, 3.5 minute headways, frequency of buses in both directions, and you look at how long they have to hold them, stop them to clear all the traffic that has to go across Sheridan Drive, you can't then coordinate the lights. So it's not going to work, but FTA wants us to go back and study it. We've been fighting that, and we will continue to fight that. The other thing that really makes Jim mad and me mad too is the effect of what that would do. If they go with bus rapid transit, what that would mean is that when you take light rail out toward the Amherst, you have to get off at the university station, go up to the bus turn around there, get on a bus rapid transit or a bus, and go the rest of the way. So basically, what that says is that people who can afford a car can have a one-seat ride. Anybody who can't afford a car is stuck having to do a transfer halfway through the trip, and it's going to be very difficult because the light rail can carry hundreds of people, and the buses are carrying 50. So you're going to have bottlenecks getting off the light rail, going up and getting on the bus. We spent 10 years studying it. There are very good reasons why we did what we did. And I don't know why the FTA wants us to go back and restudy it. And we went to their public meeting just recently and pushed back on it. We wrote a letter to them and pushed back on it. And they'll have more public meetings, so we're going to go there and push back on it. And hopefully they'll come around to realizing that bus rapid transit is not the way to go.
Yeah, length of time for travel is a very important factor in equity as well. I know that the differently abled community is extremely upset about the prospect of having to switch modes at the university station as well. And we did recently have a chance to air our opinions to the FTA about this and explain why. But if we're also looking for choice ridership, because this isn't just a replacement for the Stampede with a new brand name on it. I mean, hopefully, as a community, we're hoping that people will park and ride from the north towns and use the light rail to get downtown. If you have to switch modes, the university station, that commute is going to take at least an hour. If you could drive downtown in 20-25 minutes or take public transit in 60 minutes, what are you going to do? So anyway, yeah, there are lots of reasons to be concerned about that, because bus rapid transit isn't inappropriate in every instance. For instance, on Niagara Street or on Bailey, that could work very well. But when you're mixing modes, and having to change there, that's not a good thing. And Yeah, Jim, do we have our, your report? Is that posted on our website, or could we get it posted
going to
showing the bus bunching and everything that you photographed?
That is not a finished thing yet. I'm planning to turn that into a YouTube video, but I'm also looking to document why we have the blockade at the South Campus. And it's not going to be a very polite video at this point. I'm sure I'll calm down enough to sound nice like you and Doug do about it, but I just I've been building up, the board knows I've been sending out every day 3, 4, 5 newspaper articles from the time. Something happened between 1974 and 1978. And I'm trying to figure out why. I even have an article I just found last night from 1978 where the NFTA said it absolutely will go to the North Campus underground. And it's going to be great because we don't have to dig a tunnel. We can use a building technique called cut and cover. And they were planning to go up Bailey Avenue. Right now, if you tried to do that on Bailey, it would be a big problem, but you could probably do it up Millersport Highway with cut and cover. And it would be less expensive than almost any other option. I just don't understand why that can't happen. It'd be very, very inexpensive, very fast.
I'll say the letter that we wrote, which I think is very polite to the FTA, and it includes a lot of Jim's information in it, and I think it includes at least one of his pictures, is going to be posted on our website. We haven't done it yet because we were promoting this this presentation, and we didn't want to confuse things, and we were very busy anyway. So, but we will have that posted in the next few days. The letter we wrote to FTA, which does describe those issues.
Great. And then there was one more question. Does Governor Hochul have any level of awareness regarding this presentation?
We recently reached out to her, sent a letter with our position since she's brand spanking new. We're kind of excited that she's from Buffalo, so she certainly understands the issues. We've been working with a group, a statewide group, TCI, Transportation Climate Initiative, and we wrote a letter with them talking about how we need better public transportation funding and support generally across the state, including Buffalo. So we're reaching out to her, but we haven't really had a meeting with her or anything like that. So.
Great.
Can I make a plea for anybody watching?
Yeah.
If you have an interest in this, to please join our organization, write us a letter, and we'd be happy to get you participating on the board. There is so much going on in the transit area in Buffalo. Doug and Betsy were on a CRT for many years, and it was basically, they're pounding the drum, but there was nothing going on. All of a sudden, now there's a ton of interest, especially because of the infrastructure package and because UB grew, and now their bus system doesn't, as Doug just pointed out, there's no way they can keep the buses and the students going where they got to be on time. They have insufficient capacity, and there is no bus that will give them the capacity that they need. So come on in, join us. We need your help. A very busy, active organization, to say the least. Carl and I spent the last 15 hours in the last 2 days making Lizzie's presentation, which is really awesome. Lizzie, you did a smash up, amazing job. And we just prettied it up and, did the margins and adjusted the fonts and stuff. But her report is really great. So anyway, join us.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Lizzie. If anyone does have any questions, I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone who has registered with a link to this. I'll also be sending some of the resources that were typed into the chat, but you're welcome to email me, but I'll also provide emails for you to be able to link to CRT's website and reach out to them directly as well.
Okay. Thank you, Cricky. Thanks for moderating and for sponsoring and everything else. And Lizzie, you too, for the report. Really good. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.